Hi guys, in this video I'm going to look through the different kinds of question you'll find in the level 1 reading exam and what you'll need to do in order to be awarded the marks available. So just to give you an overview of the exam, it's 60 minutes long. There are 3 texts. You get 5 marks for section A, 12 marks for section B, 10 marks for section C and 3 marks for section D, and it's a total of 30 marks. So always keep in mind the amount of time that you've got so that you don't ever let the time run out and you realise that you haven't approached a section. So always keep in mind there is A, B, C and D. All sections of these must be completed if you're going to expect to get a reasonable mark in the exam. A very common question will be the kind of question that asks you to get a certain piece of information from a text. So instead of rereading the whole text, it's good to just scan for the phrase that is loaded with that question. So in this one, it's who is the most successful English footballer. So take apart that phrase or something that has a similar meaning and just search for it. And it should literally just be able to, you should be able to find it in the text. The question will actually say, according to text A, B, C, or D. So just make sure you're looking in the right text and that you're not spending all that time searching for it. Okay, so just look for that term and see if you can locate it. Okay, so who is the most successful footballer? It's a common question that they're only really expecting one really simple answer there. Another common question that's always in the reading exam is which layout technique helped you to find this piece of information? And a lot of people miss marks here just because they're unsure what a layout technique is. And a layout technique is anything that helps the information be organized. So you could be anything like titles, subtitles, bold text, italics, images, and captions. Now, if you ever get confused between titles and subtitles, just remember that a title goes at the top of a page, subtitle goes below it. They're commonly seen in newsletters and leaflets, subtitles are, and they're just a way to kind of portion off the information. Bold text, as you can see there, is the much deeper colour. The italics is when it's slanted. Images are just another word for photos or drawings, and then captions are the things that go underneath those drawings that kind of describe it. So when you are thinking about layout techniques, just think anything that has helped the information become more readable and more accessible for the reader, and you'll do absolutely fine. For questions that require use of a dictionary, try and just get used to kind of finding that information really fast. So if you're looking for the word different, try and speed locate it by searching for the word D and then knowing the approximate place of I within the D section. So what that means is that you don't just start at D and then work you all the way through, flipping through the pages. You think about where I is in the alphabet, and then you think, do I need to look in the beginning, the middle, or the end of that D section? And that way you should be able to save yourself just a few minutes to be able to find that. Okay, so, and this is a common question where they'll try and ask you, find another word that means the same thing as different, but keeps the meaning the same. Okay, so the use of the dictionary there would be absolutely fine, and it's only worth 1 mark. Main purpose of a text. So this is when a text often has more than one purpose, which is really common. Some of the purposes we've got is to advise, that uses phrases such as we suggest. It usually has a helpful tone offering a solution to a problem. So it's a very kind of gentle, really gentle form of writing. Next we've got explain. So just imagine yourself kind of explaining something that's quite complicated. It tends to have to be detail driven. Usually structured around those reasons why something is occurring in a certain way, and it doesn't have a personal viewpoint. Now I'm mentioning that because it's very different to the next purpose, which is persuade, which wants the reader to act upon what they have said and wants to change the reader's mind. That's really quite a strong form of writing, and it would use a lot of language techniques, which we'll look at in a second. Next we've got describe, which tries to paint a picture, usually for giving details. So it's kind of like getting people to imagine something, so say, I want you to imagine your first day at school and think about that anxiety and the nerves and how the school is large and daunting and grey. But that was me just being descriptive. Inform, now this has no feelings, okay, you just really factual, simple. It gives no opinion either way. It just tells you like it is. And inform is used a lot in newspaper articles, but we'll look at those in more detail in a second. So a new question that's been brought in recently is when you've got two photographs, it says, look at the two photographs, and you essentially need to think about a similarity. So what message is this giving? And so you can see here we've got two images are selected, and it's people reading books. So sometimes you might need to go a little bit past the obvious, not just say books, but just say that it's about books being good, because you can see that both photographs have been taken where people seem to be quite enjoying the books. They're both out in nature, they're both happy. So it's a very, very positive image with books. If it was an image of somebody having their head down and crying and reading a book, the message would be completely different. And that's a little bit of an inference. It's quite a high level skill there. Which language features are used? Now this is quite a difficult question. Now, when you approach this question in a mock, you will realise that you don't have to be an expert in language features for this question. Now, I don't think that's Edexcel's intention. You just need to be able to start to recognise them just to prepare yourself for level 2 functional skills and for GCSE English. So we've got imperatives and commands. This is just something that tells the reader to do something. Say something like, you must do this. Or we could use it in persuasive writing. A lot of these can be used in persuasive writing, to be honest. So for an imperative or a command in persuasive writing would be, go and get this phone. You must get it now. Really kind of instilling that kind of sense of urgency in the reader. Questions, okay, so sometimes it can just be a question, sometimes it's rhetorical, oftentimes it is rhetorical in a text. Rhetorical means it doesn't need an answer, but it makes somebody think and question it, such as, how would you feel? Next we have statistics or numbers or dates you could have, and that's to kind of support your point and make it a lot stronger. So 50% of people would come again is quite persuasive. Well, I would have chosen a much higher percentage myself. Next we have first person, which is involving the reader. And you can see this a lot in a lot of persuasive speeches. So you have the power to change the world, okay? Really involving the reader there. A few other techniques we have is simile, so making a comparison using like or as. So I feel as though my head weighs a ton. So any simile just has like or as. That's when you're saying that it's not really the case, but it's almost as if it's the case. Now a metaphor is when you say something is something it isn't. Okay, so having English last lesson is a stone in my shoe. So really a metaphor is much stronger. You're saying that it is something. A simile is that you're saying it's like or as. Personification, now think about that word person. Okay, so an ification, the tion ending tends to be when you've given a characteristic to something. So it's the characteristic of being a person. So personification is when we give human qualities to something that isn't human. So the chair sighed as Big Tony settled into it. Okay, so a chair can't actually sigh, but we're trying to give it that kind of human quality there. Adjectives. Now, adjectives are really important, and they're just describing words. And this is something that's fantastic, especially if you're doing your writing exam. They put a few adjectives in there to kind of, get to that 250 to 300 word count on that first question for your reading exam. What a magnificent school. So that word magnificent there has made the sentence a lot more interesting, a lot more powerful. And then finally, guys, we have the rule of three, and these are three describing words. So homework is pointless, stupid, and unfair. So that's when we use three adjectives or describing words together that kind of just creates that stronger effect, because instead of using one adjective, we've used three. So when we were asked to explain a quotation, it can be quite difficult, and to help you with that, I want you to look at context. Now, context is the situation in which it's used. Okay, so if I was writing a text about peer mentoring, and I'd say peer mentoring allows you to meet someone who will support you, who's been through the things that you've been through, and can be someone to look up to. Okay, so try and use that context. So I've put my answer there. And A is someone who you can use an example of how to act and behave to use as a role model. And then for B, a step in the right direction. So you're just trying to explain what that really means. Try not to just repeat exactly what the person said, not even say avoid using the same words that the person's used in the quotation. They're looking for you to show that understanding, and you're not going to get that if you just repeat it. So just try and put that in another way, okay? Even though you might understand it, you need to kind of express that understanding using different words than the words that have already been used. So locating appropriate subheadings. Now a subheading is any heading that is below the main title, and it's usually located on the left hand side. This is a 2-mark question. I'll just give you one example. So it says give a subheading that tells you about safety equipment. So for that you've got to kind of go back to the text that it's referring to and have a quick scan and see if you can find anything that has a similar meaning to that. And I would pick the one that says what you'll need to do when setting up a camp. Now they might have these exact same words that the question does, which is be fantastic if it does, but it might just have a similar meaning. The examiner might try and trick you a little bit. So just be careful with this. It's only a 2-mark question, but just quickly scan and think, which one is the most appropriate. For identifying facts and opinions, try and look at how the ideas are expressed. So opinions are usually began with words like I believe, in my view, in my opinion. That's because opinions tend to be very, very personal. They're an individual's viewpoint about something and they're not based on facts. Whereas facts are directly stated, they tend to be quite short sentences. So I am an English teacher, I am living in England. These things are facts, okay? But opinions are all about feelings. Like I feel that exam didn't go very well. It's not a fact at all. But if I said I only got 70% in that last exam, then you know that it's a fact because it's based on the actual results that I must have received. Formal language is a kind of language that we use in a professional setting. It's where we use the full form of the word rather than shortening it. So we've got our first example here. I do not approve of that. It's very, very formal, and for 2 reasons here we can see we've used a more formal expression, a more formal word here with approve. Okay, you could have just said like, but instead you've used the word approve. Now with informal, we've used a contraction form of the word. So it used to be I do not like that, but we've shortened it to don't. So I'll ask you a question, what is an example of formal and informal language? So formal tends to be look for those longer words that you don't see in an everyday language. We call that sophisticated vocabulary. And then for informal, look for any kind of slang terms or colloquialisms. That's kind of words that we use with our friends, but it's not exactly in the English dictionary. And also any kind of contracted forms of a word is a great example of informal language. For this question, finding similar ideas in 2 texts, you get 3 marks, and that's 1 mark for the idea, so the idea that is similar in the 2 texts, and then 2 further marks for each quote that you use. So you need a quote from text A and a quote from text B that both show a similarity. So it's a similarity in ideas, even though there might be different words that are used. So I just want you to take a moment to pause the video, then in a second we'll have a look at what the answer will be. So for the similarity, you should have found something along the same lines as this, that they both believe that hunting has been part of a tradition. And the quote I use from source A is just that it has a long tradition, and then source B will pass the tradition on. So source B here implies, it suggests that there was a tradition, where source A directly says it. So any kind of commonality that you can find like that will get you the marks there. So there's usually a question about punctuation, and this is a multiple choice question which is worth 1 mark. And these are a few examples that you might expect to see. So you could be asked to see why an apostrophe has been used, so why has brackets been used, or why commas have been used, and also possibly a question mark or exclamation mark. I'm just going to let you pause the video for a second and we'll have a look at some possible answers that you might include so you know what they would expect. So here's the explanation. So whenever they ask you about an apostrophe, it's either to show that someone owns something, as in a possessive apostrophe, or to show that a word is missing. And the apostrophe, it kind of looks like an upside down comma that's up in the air. So the example that we used before was don't. So it used to be do not, but we've put the apostrophe there to show that we've had the O removed. So for the brackets, so we use brackets to show that the information contained is either obvious or needed. So it's kind of like the sentence doesn't really need it in order to make sense, and the brackets are those two half circles there. So commas, they can either be used to kind of separate items in a list or separate ideas in a sentence. And either of them would have been acceptable depending on the punctuation that the examiner chooses to use for your individual exam. So I'll put a link in the description for any downloads related to this, and it'll be on my test page. Thanks a lot for watching, guys.